All right, let's get into a movie called Murder Mystery. So we got this cop by the name of Nick. He's got a best friend named Jimmy. The thing is, he's been trying to be a detective, but he failed the detective exam like 3 times. The problem is he keeps telling his wife Audrey that he made detective. Now Audrey's basically a hairdresser, but in her spare time she reads a lot of detective books. Let that set the tone for her character. So the thing is, Nick and Audrey have been married for like 15 years, and they've been planning this trip to Europe, but they've never gotten there. Because Nick's been lying and he hasn't been making as much money as she thinks he's making to be a detective, because obviously he's not a detective. And she pretty much gave up on that dream. Well, not really gave up on it. So it's their 15th anniversary coming up, and Nick and Audrey are going out for dinner while Jimmy and his wife, they're double dating or whatever like that. And he's basically getting Jimmy to lie for him, just in case the conversation of the detective comes up. So later on, he's got to pick up some stuff. He's got to pick up some Claritin and some stuff from the store, and he sees this kid stealing. He knows he's stealing. He got stuff in his bag. So he's not an idiot. He's sharp when it comes to stuff. So they bring up the conversation again about Europe. And he's like, oh, baby, you ruined a surprise. That's exactly what I was going to take you to Europe this year. She's like, oh, we're finally going? Knowing damn well he ain't got the money to cover this trip. Bottom line, it'll be just enough because they're broke. But she don't know that because, once again, she thinks he's making more money because he's a detective. So they're taking a trip, they're flying in coach. After a while, she needs some earplugs because her husband's over there snoring. But she's not paying $9 for no earplugs. She ends up wandering over into the first class part. And then she ends up talking to this dude by the name of Charles. Charles actually likes her company. And then he starts talking about this girl named Susie that was supposed to be his girl, wife, whatever the case may be. But his own uncle ended up stealing her out from under her nose. Turns out his uncle's actually a billionaire who goes by the name of Mr. Quince. Nick wakes up and goes into the first class spot, and they all have discussions. Now, between that, Charles wants to invite both of them onto his uncle's private boat or whatever like that. Now, why is he inviting them? And then she's thinking to herself, like, why do you even want to go and deal with this? He said, because basically I want to get drunk and crash the damn party. Now, they're supposed to be getting on this tour bus after they reach Spain. But they see how the kids in there, they're noisy and loud the tour bus is. They decide to change their mind and take their thing with Charles. So we get on the boat, we meet Susie, we find out she's Japanese. This will come up later. Then we meet Charles's brother, Toby. Now, Toby, I think, is supposed to be gay. This will come up later, too. Then we meet this lady by the name of Grace Ballard. She's supposed to be like a movie star, actor, and all this other stuff, right? Nick's seen all her movies. He's infatuated with all this stuff. Then we meet this guy by the name of Juan Carlos. Turns out he's like the #1 professional car racer or something like that. He doesn't really speak English that good. Then we got this colonel with his one eye patch and a gun on the side, and his bodyguard by the name of Sergey. Now, Nick is kind of scared about the gun, but Charles informs him that he never really loads it up. It's never really loaded. There's no bullets in it, right? Or so he says. And he's also on board with this guy by the name of the Maharaja. So they're like bowing to him a bunch of times. He's just fucking with him, whatever, like that. He's just a big jokester. All right, so now that we got everybody out the way, Nick is just hungry. He's ready to meet this dude Maurice and get some food. So they bring everybody in this one particular room, and then all of a sudden, Mr. Quince comes down with Susie. Now, he's supposedly glad to have everybody here, but the real purpose of this meeting is about a will. He tells them basically they're all a bunch of leeches, and then he's leaving his entire will to Susie. Now, there's this dagger that's encased in a plastic cover or whatever like that. This is going to come up in a minute. See, the will's not signed yet, and right before he's about to sign her name to the will, all of a sudden the lights go out. The lights come back on. The dagger's in Mr. Quince's chest. He's done deal daddy shit. But when the lights were out, we also heard a gunshot go off. So you're thinking to yourself, the colonel. The thing was, there were no bullet wounds in him or anything like that. So we go back to the point of him saying that he never keeps bullets in his gun. Now, while all this was going on, when people were so mad about putting the will or whatever, Grace Ballard was the only one that left the room. When she heard the gunshot, she came back in and started crying like, oh my God, what happened to Mr. Quince? So now Nick and Audrey are going to get on their detective shit. So now they think to themselves, they're trying to put suspects together. Now Nick has already called the Coast Guard, you know what I'm saying, and a real lieutenant, you know what I'm saying? And they're going to be there by the time they board Morocco. Now they're thinking to themselves, if the colonel did it, but there's no shots let off in the gun. Then he's thinking to himself, what if Charles did it? Charles would be still pissed off about Susie. And on top of that being left out of the will. Before we get to all that speculation, everybody apparently went to their respective rooms. All of a sudden, we hear a gunshot again. And even then, we're thinking to ourselves, Toby was the most hated by Mr. Quince, by his son, you know what I'm saying? Because he had 2 sons. Well, technically. We go in the room and find Toby did his shit. He had another little pistol in his hand, and there was a suicide note in front of him. Conveniently typed, right? So we're thinking to ourselves, where did Toby get that small gun from? Not the colonel's gun. The colonel still has his gun, and it's a little bit bigger. So now they finally boarded the docks of Morocco, and everybody's being questioned. And the crazy thing is, he's actually starting to think that Nick and Audrey did it. For one, they're not even part of the family. They automatically just get invited. And then all of a sudden, 2 people end up dead on the boat. And on top of that, he knows Nick is a liar. Now, how does he know this? Because he did a little background check. And he knows he's been lying to his wife about being a detective. And on top of that, both of them were claiming they were broke just to taking this trip alone. So is that more motive to get into the will? So the detective's automatically picturing Nick and Audrey as the culprits, but he ain't got no proof yet. But what he does to make sure they don't leave, confiscate their passports. But Charles made sure they got into the most lavish hotels or whatever like that to be able to stay during their welcome and whatnot. So they've been talking to everybody, doing their own little investigations or whatever like that. Now Aubrey was talking to Susie, and both of them have allergies or whatever like that. So both of them take Claritin. You're going to see where I'm going with this later on. So it gets to a point where Nick and Audrey get back to the hotel, and somebody slides a note in the door like, come to room 802. We're like, Okay. They get to room 802 and automatically Sergi's got a gun on him. He's like, yo, sit down. Now to this point, Sergi has not talked the whole movie. So then he starts talking, he gives this background information about the Colonel. Now the Colonel's actually saved Mr. Quince's life on 2 separate occasions years ago. But the thing is, the Colonel was married to this lady by the name Mademoiselle. There was a bomb explosion that happened in the house, killing her and there's supposed to be a newborn son. But he was able to save Mr. Quince's life. So while they're doing that, all of a sudden a knock opens the door and he hides Nick and Audrey in the closet. While they're in the closet, all of a sudden you hear gunshots going off and Sergi ends up dead as shit. It's like, what? They get out the closet. Meanwhile, the people still start shooting. They gotta run out. They gotta go out the window. At this point, they're like 10 stories up. They're going across one window. They see the Colonel in there just flossing his teeth. So right then and there, we know he not doing the shooting. Then they get to this whole other room and break in. All of a sudden, some people about to come in the room. They're like, oh shit, we're going to hide under the bed. Turns out it ended up being the Maharaji and Grace. And they about to just get it on. You know what I'm saying? They about to get a pop and smashing cheeks. But he ends up blowing his load early. It's like, oh my God, really, dude? And then Grace and the Maharaji just leave out. Nick and Audrey are dying laughing under the bed. Shit was hilarious. So at this point, they escaped to try to get some dinner or whatever like that. Then they found out in the news that Nick and Audrey are even more suspects now. And now they putting it on blast. I'm like, wow. But the thing is, the detective puts up on blast and tells people that Nick is not a detective. He's just a regular ass cop. Audrey just found out about this information. She is pissed off. So at this point, they end up separating for a minute. So while Audrey's just sitting there, all of a sudden Charles comes through. He ends up getting in his car. Meanwhile, Nick is going on a solo mission to try to find Susie. So next day we see Audrey and Charles. They still in the car, whatever like that. They stop at this library. He's going in. He's going to be right back. Now, meanwhile, Audrey's like digging through the car and she finds Claritin. Japanese Claritin. See where I'm going with this? Now, why the fuck would Charles have Japanese Claritin in the car? The only person that's Japanese is Susie, and she needs to take Claritin too. See what I'm getting with this? So she goes into the library, is trying to find Charles. She can't find nobody. All of a sudden, she finds Nick in there. She's like, what the heck are you doing here? I was following Susie. So they're trying to put 2 and 2 together. They think Charles and Susie are in it to collaborate to try to get the will. All of a sudden, gunshots start going off. They mess up the library just to try to get out of there. They end up running into Carlos throughout all of this. And all of a sudden, Susie turns around. She's about to bang off with the gun. I'm like, oh, snap. Did Susie one of the killers? Before she was able to do anything, she gets hit with a dart in her neck. I'm like, oh, shit. Some masked person with a cloak on hit her with the dart. And now they chasing after the person with the mask. Because Nick ends up picking up Susie's gun and going after him. Now, in the midst of the chaos, Nick ends up throwing a glass plate, ends up breaking the mask, but you didn't see who was behind the mask or whatever. And the person ends up dipping off. Meanwhile, the detective comes. Somebody recorded some of the footage of what took place. Now, the detective thinks Nick and Audrey done killed Susie. Because afterwards, she was done dead as shit. Then all of a sudden, the detective gets a phone call. Nick calls the detective. They talk about, we're going to the concierge to see what's going on with Charles. Because they think Charles is really behind us. But when they get there, they see Charles poison. He's done dead as shit. We like, what the fuck? So now they got to come up with a plan because the police are going to be there soon. And they're going to think automatically that they're the ones behind everything. So now they put a plan together. They end up showing up in like dresses and suits or whatever. And they bring in the 4 people that are still alive. Grace, the Maharaja, the Colonel, and Carlos. Now they're trying to figure out all this stuff. And then it ends up pointing right to Grace. They was like, she could have been the one to turn the lights off while Toby ended up stabbing Mr. Quince done dead as shit. It was like she was probably the one shooting through the door. And then try to sneak in the other room like she was going to have sex with the Maharaja or whatever, right? All these signs are pointing to her, but the thing is, they're going off theories. They don't have no proof. Then as she's about to walk out the door, Audrey's like, take off your hat. Now she had this little stylish ass hat on. Then they're forcing her to take off her hat and she's got this mark on her head. I'm like, oh shit. That's the mark she got when Nick threw the fucking plate at her when they were throwing the poison darts. Now you think to yourself, how would he figure her being a dart person? Because that same prop that she used to throw the darts was actually in one of her first movies called Poison Darts. And they figured her name because she had changed her name to Grace Ballard because her real name is Grace Butler. So the thing is with the will, regardless of what would have happened, the will would have automatically went to the kids. But seeing how both of the kids were done deal dirty shit, supposedly, they found out the whole story with the Colonel and Mademoiselle and the boy that she's supposed to be having. Turns out it was supposed to be a girl that they were having and the girl was still alive. That girl is actually Grace Butler. So now she's been discovered. She ends up taking Audrey for hostage. She's like, hey, yo, back up. But with quick thinking, Nick ends up grabbing the Colonel's gun and shooting, and it actually shoots off a shot. Hits her on the shoulder, and they capture her about to throw her to jail. How did he know the Colonel actually had a bullet in his gun? He's never showed any information where he could have any bullets in the gun whatsoever. How did Nick know this? So anyway, case solved, right? But you think to yourself, it had to be 2 people involved in this. So even though if they thought, Toby was the one that killed Mr. Quince, and even though Toby and both of them are dead, the Maharaja says something to them, and they go back to the hotel scene. He was like, yeah, I was trying to get in there with Grace, but I was talking to her for like a whole hour before anything took place. So then they thinking, well, who was shooting through us at the door? And you notice before everybody left, Carlos was talking perfect English for like a couple of sentences. We were like, where'd this come from? And they realized it was fucking Carlos the whole time behind this shit. Carlos ends up taking the police chief after he tries to tackle him or whatever like that, and they get in the car. Now, it's going to be a chase scene because obviously he's one of the best racers in all of Europe or whatever. So we had this crazy ass chase scene. Eventually they swerve him off the road, end up hitting a statue or something like that. They get the lieutenant out, but then Carlos is still conscious. He punches the nigga out the face, and he's about to start shooting, about to let off on both of them. But right before he does, he gets hit by a fucking tour bus. The same tour bus they were supposed to get on right before they ended up going with Charles in the first place to get on the boat. They brought the tour bus back. So after all that, Lieutenant gives him a recommendation and everything like that, back to his superiors back in Brooklyn and everything. And I guess Nick can finally become a real detective now. And they basically enjoy their vacation. Crazy. Now I'm about to check out part 2 because it just came out. You already know what time it is. Murder Mystery on Netflix. Check it out. Yeah. Adam Sandler, Jennifer Aniston, and all that good shit.